Hi there, welcome to Fantasy Hub. I'm Mia, your storyteller. Today's story is filled with heartache, discovery, and a twist you won't see coming. So let's begin.
The morning sun painted Louisville's Churchill, downs in shades of gold that should have filled Coral's heart with the familiar warmth she'd known for years. Instead, as she sat in the commentator's booth, adjusting her headset with trembling fingers, the colors seemed too bright, too harsh. The roar of the crowd below crashed against her eardrums like waves against jagged rocks. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another thrilling day of horse racing. She spoke into the microphone, her voice steady despite the chaos brewing within her mind. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The horses thundering down the track created a symphony of sounds that, to Coral's unique perception, bloomed into cascades of color and texture. She had lived with synesthesia her entire adult life, a neurological gift that painted sounds in vivid hues and transformed voices into dancing light. For 15 years of marriage to Brett, she had managed this condition with practiced ease. But now, 3 months after their divorce papers were signed, her world had become a kaleidoscope gone mad. The thundering hooves weren't just brown and gold anymore, they were violent slashes of red and black that made her stomach lurch. The crowd's cheers transformed into jagged purple lightning that pierced her skull. Even her own voice, once a comfortable blue ribbon in her mind's eye, now appeared as fractured glass. And they're coming around the final turn, Coral continued, gripping the edge of her desk as waves of nausea rolled through her. The finish line approached, and she knew she had to hold on just a little longer. But as the winning horse crossed the line and the crowd erupted, the explosion of color in her mind became too much. The booth spun around her like a child's top, and darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. The last thing she remembered was the concerned voice of her broadcasting partner echoing through the speakers. "Folks, we're experiencing some technical difficulties." Dr. Rebecca Martinez sat across from Coral in the sterile examination room, her kind eyes filled with professional concern. At 42, Coral had never felt more fragile, more broken than she did in that moment, wrapped in a hospital gown that smelled of industrial bleach. "Your blood work is perfect," Dr. Martinez said, flipping through the test results. "Heart rate, blood pressure, neurological responses, everything checks out normally. But I want to talk to you about what you've been going through emotionally." Coral shifted uncomfortably on the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath. Her like autumn leaves. "I told you, doctor. It's just the divorce, Brett and I. Well, 15 years is a long time to throw away. Tell me about the synesthesia episodes." Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her voice gentle but probing. "You mentioned they've become more intense since the separation." The older woman's voice appeared in Coral's mind as soft lavender ribbons, one of the few sounds that still retained its peaceful color. She found herself relaxing slightly. "It's like someone turned up the volume on everything," Coral explained, her hands gesturing helplessly. "Sounds that used to be beautiful colors now look like broken glass or angry storms. I can't concentrate at work. I can barely sleep." Dr. Martinez nodded knowingly. "Emotional trauma can absolutely exacerbate synesthetic experiences. Your brain is processing stress, and it's amplifying all your sensory input. I'm going to prescribe some mild anti-anxiety medication, but more importantly, I want you to consider counseling, and ... She paused, studying Coral's face. "Have you thought about taking up a new hobby? Something that might help you reconnect with peaceful sensory experiences? Maybe horseback riding, since you work around horses anyway?" Coral almost laughed. "Doctor, I call horse races. I don't ride them." "Well," Dr. Martinez smiled, "perhaps it's time to consider getting closer to the source of what you love about your work." 2 weeks later, Coral found herself in the most unlikely of places, a community emergency response training session held at the local fire department. She couldn't quite explain what had driven her there, perhaps Dr. Martinez's suggestion to try new things, or maybe just the desperate need to fill the echoing emptiness of her evenings. The instructor, a robust firefighter named Captain Mills, was demonstrating CPR techniques when the overhead lights flickered and went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the room in an eerie red glow that sent Coral's synesthesia into overdrive. "Everyone remain calm," Captain Mills called out, his voice creating jagged orange spikes in Coral's vision. "We'll have power back in just a moment," but Coral was far from calm. The red emergency lights combined with the nervous, murmur of 20 strangers created a sensory storm in her mind. Colors clashed and swirled, and she felt the familiar onset of panic rising in her chest. Ma'am, ma'am, are you all right? The voice cut through the chaos like a cool stream through a desert. Coral looked up to find a woman kneeling beside her. Chair, strong hands gently touching her shoulder. Even in the dim emergency lighting, she could see kind green eyes and auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. I'm fine, Coral whispered, though they both knew she wasn't. You don't look fine, the woman said with a slight smile. I'm Sydney Carter, and you look like you're having what my sister calls a brainstorm. Sydney's voice appeared in Coral's. Mind as gentle waves of siphon green, the first truly peaceful color she'd experienced in months. Without thinking, she found herself leaning into that calming presence. Coral Wilson, she managed to say. And yes, I suppose you could call it that. When the lights came back on a few minutes later, Sydney didn't immediately move away. Instead, she studied Carol's face with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to reading animals and humans alike. You know, Sydney said thoughtfully, I run a horse training facility about 20 minutes outside the city. We specialize in therapeutic riding programs. Something tells me you might benefit from spending some time with horses that aren't running. In circles. 3 days passed before Coral worked up the courage to call the number Sydney had written on the back of a business card. During those 3 days, she replayed their brief encounter over and over, marveling at how Sydney's presence had somehow quieted the storm in her mind. Carter Training Stables, Sydney answered on the second ring, and once again, Coral felt that wash of peaceful green in her synesthetic perception. This is Coral Wilson. We met at the emergency response training. Coral, I was hoping you'd call. How are you feeling? There was something in Sydney's tone, genuine concern without pity, interest without intrusion, that made Coral's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Honestly, not great. But I keep thinking about what you said about the horses. Well, why don't you come out this Saturday afternoon? No pressure, no commitments. Just come see what we do here. I think you might find it soothing. Saturday arrived with one of those perfect Kentucky mornings that made the state famous. Coral drove down winding country roads lined with white fences and rolling pastures, her GPS guiding her to an address she'd double and triple checked. Carter Training Stables turned out to be a modest but well-maintained facility nestled in a valley between gentle hills. The main barn was painted a warm red that somehow didn't trigger Coral's synesthetic overload, and paddocks stretched out on either side like a peaceful patchwork quilt. Sydney emerged from the barn as Coral parked her car, wiping her hands on a towel tucked into her belt. She wore faded jeans, worn leather boots, and a blue work shirt that brought out the green in her eyes. There was something undeniably attractive about her confidence, the way she moved with purpose and grace. You found us, Sydney called out, her smile genuine and warm. Come on, let me introduce you to some friends of mine. The first horse Sydney introduced was a gentle mare named Moonbeam, a gray thoroughbred with soulful dark eyes and a coat that gleamed like silver in the afternoon sun. She's retired from racing, Sydney explained, running her hand along the horse's neck with obvious affection. Spent 8 years on the track, but now she specializes in helping people find their calm center. Coral approached cautiously. She'd been around horses professionally for years, but always from a distance, always as an observer rather than a participant. Just let her smell your hand first, Sydney guided, moving to stand close behind Coral. Horses communicate a lot through scent and energy. When Moonbeam nuzzled Coral's palm with her soft muzzle, something extraordinary happened. The gentle wicker the horse made appeared in Coral's mind as flowing ribbons of silver and blue, the most beautiful colors she'd seen since her divorce. Oh, Coral breathed, her eyes filling with unexpected tears. She's beautiful. Sydney's hand came to rest on Coral's back, a comforting presence that somehow felt both natural and thrilling. She likes you. Moonbeam has excellent taste in people. They spent the next 2 hours walking through the stables, meeting horses with names like Thunder, Serenity, and Courage. Each one offered a different visual symphony to Coral's synesthetic perception, but unlike the chaotic cacophony of recent months, these were harmonious, soothing. How do you do it? Coral asked as they sat on a bench outside the main barn, watching horses graze in the nearest paddock. Create this kind of peace, I mean. Sydney was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. I haven't always done this. Work, she said finally. 10 years ago, I was a corporate lawyer in Lexington, worked 8-hour days, lived on takeout and ambition, and thought I had everything figured out. She turned to look at Coral, and something in her expression suggested this wasn't a story she shared often. Then I had what the doctors politely called a stress-induced breakdown, couldn't get out of bed for 3 months. My partner at the time, Sydney's voice caught slightly. She couldn't handle it, said I'd become someone she didn't recognize. Coral felt a familiar ache in her chest. I'm sorry. Don't be... It was the best thing that ever happened to me, eventually. My aunt left me this property, and I decided to try something completely different. Turns out, horses are excellent therapists. They don't judge, they don't lie, and they force you to be present in the moment. Sydney's green eyes met Coral's with startling intensity. What I'm trying to say is, I know what it's like when your world falls apart, and I know what it's like to rebuild it into something better than you ever imagined. Coral began visiting Carter training stables every Saturday, and then Wednesdays, and then whenever her broadcasting schedule allowed. Each visit brought new discoveries, new moments of peace amidst the ongoing chaos of her divorce proceedings and career pressures. Sydney proved to be an excellent teacher, patient, and intuitive. She never pushed Coral beyond her comfort zone, but somehow always knew exactly when to encourage her to try something new. I think you're ready to try riding, Sydney announced one warm afternoon in late spring. They'd been working together for 6 weeks, and Coral had grown comfortable grooming and leading the horses, but mounting one had seemed like an insurmountable step. I don't know, Coral hesitated, eyeing Moonbeam's saddle with trepidation. What if I fall? What if you fly? Sydney countered with a grin that made Coral's stomach flutter in ways that had nothing to do with fear. The first time Coral sat in Moonbeam's saddle, walking slowly around the ring with Sydney leading the mare, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, pure, uncomplicated joy. The gentle rocking motion, the connection with the powerful animal beneath her, the late afternoon sun painting everything in golden light, it all combined into a sensory experience that her synesthesia interpreted as the most beautiful symphony of color and movement she'd ever perceived. How do you feel? Sydney called out, walking backwards so she could watch Coral's face. Like I'm flying, Coral laughed, and the sound of her own laughter appeared in her mind as dancing butterflies of yellow and orange. But it wasn't just the horses that were healing her. It was Sydney herself, the way she listened without judgment, the way she seemed to understand Coral's synesthetic experiences without finding them strange or overwhelming. It was the casual touches that lingered a moment longer than necessary, the shared glances that carried unspoken understanding. It was the way Sydney looked at her like she was someone worth knowing. Everything changed on a Thursday evening in June. Coral had stopped by the stables after a particularly difficult day at work. A technical malfunction during a major race had left her rattled and overstimulated. She found Sydney in the barn, mucking out stalls with methodical efficiency. Rough day? Sydney asked, not looking up from her work. The worst. Coral sank down on a hay bale, suddenly exhausted. Sometimes I wonder if I'm losing my mind entirely. The sounds, the colors, it's all getting worse again. Sydney sat down, her pitchfork, and came to sit beside Coral on the hay bale. What happened? Brett called. He wants to meet tomorrow to discuss unfinished business regarding the divorce settlement. His lawyer thinks I'm hiding assets because I took this job in Kentucky instead of staying in California, where we could split everything 50-50. Coral's hands were shaking as she spoke, and Sydney gently covered them with her own. The touch sent warmth shooting up Coral's arms and into her chest. Are you hiding assets? Sydney asked quietly. No, I came here because I needed space, needed to start over. But he acts like everything I do is some calculated move to hurt him. Tears were flowing freely now. 15 years, Sydney. 15 years of marriage, and he can't even grant me the dignity of an honest fresh start. Sydney was quiet for a long moment, her thumbs tracing gentle circles on the backs of Coral's hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Coral, can I ask you something personal? Coral nodded, not trusting her voice. Were you happy in those 15 years? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Coral had been asked many variations of this question by Dr. Martinez, by well-meaning friends, by her own reflection in the mirror at 3 a.m. But somehow, sitting in this barn with Sydney's hands warm on hers, she found herself able to answer honestly for the first time. No, she whispered. I don't think I was. I thought I was supposed to be happy, and I convinced myself that was the same thing. Sydney's green eyes searched her face. And now? Are you happy now? Coral looked around the barn, breathing in the scent of hay and horses and the subtle perfume Sydney always wore. She listened to the gentle sounds of the horses settling for. The night watched the colors they painted in her mind, all soft pastels and flowing lines instead of the harsh, jagged shapes that had plagued her for months. Here with you? Yes, I'm happy here. The admission hung between them, loaded with possibility and fear. Sydney's face was very close now, close enough that Coral could see the gold flecks in her green eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of her breath. Coral, Sydney whispered, and her name on those lips appeared in Coral's mind as the most beautiful cascade of silver and blue she'd ever seen. And then they were kissing, soft and tentative at first, then with growing passion as weeks of unspoken attraction finally found expression. Coral felt like she was drowning and being saved simultaneously, like every color in her synesthetic palette was singing in perfect harmony for the first time in her life. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sydney rested her forehead against Coral's. I've wanted to do that for weeks, Sydney admitted. So have I, Coral replied, surprised by her own honesty. But Sydney, I'm not sure I know how to do this. I've never been with a woman. I've never even thought about... Hey, Sydney's voice was gentle, understanding. There's no rush, no expectations. We can take this as slow as you need to. That night, Coral lay in her bed staring up a ceiling, her mind racing. Sydney's kiss had awakened something in her that she'd never allowed herself to acknowledge, a truth that felt both terrifying and liberating. The next morning's meeting with Brett was brutal. He sat across from her in his lawyer's conference room, the same man she'd once loved, wearing his disapproval like expensive cologne. I don't understand what's gotten into you, Coral, he said, shuffling through financial documents. This whole Kentucky thing, this sudden independence act, it's not like you. Maybe that's the problem, Brett. Maybe I'm tired of being like me. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Holloway, interrupted their exchange. Mr. Wilson has expressed concern that your recent lifestyle changes might be affecting your judgment regarding the financial aspects of your divorce. My lifestyle changes? Coral's voice was dangerously quiet. Brett had the grace to look uncomfortable. Look, Coral, I heard you've been spending time with some woman who runs a horse farm. People talk, and given your ... condition, with the synesthesia and all, I just want to make sure you're thinking clearly. The room erupted in colors, angry reds and violent purples that made Coral's head spin. But instead of the overwhelming chaos she'd experienced before, she found herself able to see through the storm to a core of steel within herself. Let me be very clear, Brett, she said, her voice steady and strong. My synesthesia is not a condition that impairs my judgment. It's a neurological difference that I've managed successfully throughout our entire marriage. And my friendship with Sydney Carter has nothing to do with our financial arrangements. She paused, realizing that something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of herself. But you're right about one thing. I am different now. I'm not the woman who was so afraid of disappointing you that she forgot what she actually wanted. I'm not the woman who spent 15 years apologizing for taking up space in her own life. Patricia Holloway cleared her throat. Perhaps we could focus on the financial matters at hand. Of course, Coral smiled, and for the first time in months, it felt genuine. I have nothing to hide, and I want this settled fairly and quickly. I have a life to get back to. That evening, Coral drove straight to Carter Training Stables. She found Sydney in the small apartment above the main barn, cooking dinner while listening to country music on an old radio. The domestic scene made something warm and soft bloom in Coral's chest. How did it go? Sydney asked, looking up from the stove where she was stirring what smelled like the most amazing pasta sauce in the world. It went, Coral said, then found herself laughing. Actually, it went better than I expected. I think I finally found my voice again. Sydney turned down the radio and gave Coral her full attention. What do you mean? Coral took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I mean, I told Brett the truth. That I'm not the same person I was when we got married. That I'm not apologizing for that anymore. Good for you. Sydney's smile was proud and warm. And how do you feel about that? Terrified, Coral admitted, and free. And ... both, she paused, looking into Sydney's green eyes. Ready to be honest about something else. Sydney set down her Wooden Spoon moved closer, sensing the importance of the moment. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about there being no rush, no expectations. And I realized that maybe I've been rushing toward the wrong things my whole life and had expectations about the wrong person. Coral reached out and took Sydney's hands, marveling at how right it felt, how the simple touch created cascades of peaceful color in her mind. I don't know much about being with a woman, she continued, but I know that when I'm with you, the chaos in my head quiets down. I know that your voice is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in any sense of the word. And I know that for the first time in my adult life, I'm not pretending to be someone I'm not. Sydney's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Coral ... double quotes. I'm falling in love with you, Sydney. Maybe I've already fallen. And it scares me to death, but it's the first honest thing I've felt in years. Sydney's response was to pull Coral into her arms and kiss her with a passion that made every color in Coral's synesthetic palette sing in perfect harmony. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. I love you too, Sydney whispered against Coral's lips. I've been falling for you since that first night when the lights went out and you let me help you. They made love that night with a tenderness that surprised them both. In Sydney's bed, surrounded by quilts that smelled like lavender and hay, Coral discovered parts of herself she'd never known existed. Sydney's touch was gentle and patient, her kisses slow and thorough, her whispered endearments painting the most beautiful colors Coral had ever seen. Is this okay? Sydney asked, her hands tracing patterns on Coral's skin that felt like music made tangible. It's perfect, Coral breathed, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Later, lying tangled together in the afterglow, Coral felt a peace settle over her that she'd never experienced before. The synesthetic colors in her mind had softened to a gentle aurora of blues and greens and silvers, like the northern lights dancing across her consciousness. Sydney, she whispered into the darkness. Dr. Martinez said I needed to find something to help me reconnect with peaceful sensory experiences. Coral traced circles on Sydney's bare shoulder. I don't think she expected me to find you. Sydney's laugh rumbled against Coral's cheek. Sometimes the best medicine is the kind that surprises us. They fell asleep curled together, Coral's head on Sydney's chest, listening to the steady heartbeat that appeared in her mind as gentle waves of gold and blue. 3 months later, Coral stood in the announcer's booth at Churchill Downs, preparing for the Kentucky Derby broadcast. But this time something was different. The roar of the crowd still painted colors in her mind, but they were harmonious now, like a well-conducted orchestra instead of a cacophony. In the owner's box, she could see Sydney watching, wearing the blue dress Coral had helped her pick out for the occasion. Their eyes met across the distance, and Sydney's smile appeared in Coral's mind as cascading ribbons of joy. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kentucky Derby. Coral spoke into her microphone, her voice strong and clear. Today we witness not just the race, but the poetry of motion, the symphony of thundering hearts, the beauty of creatures who were born to run. As the horses loaded into the starting gate, Coral felt a familiar flutter of anticipation. But it was excitement now, not anxiety. She'd learned to trust her perceptions again, to see the synesthetic colors as gifts rather than burdens. And they're off. She called as the gates opened and 20 horses surged forward in a kaleidoscope of power and grace. The race unfolded before her like a visual symphony, each horse's gait creating its own unique pattern of color and light in her mind. But more than that, she was aware of Sydney's presence in the crowd, a constant source of peace and strength. When the winning horse crossed the finish line, Coral's call was passionate and perfect, and its thunderstorm by a length, with Moonlight Shadow second and Graceful Dancer showing third in a thrilling finish to this year's Derby. After the broadcast, she found Sydney waiting for her outside the booth, her face glowing with pride. That was incredible, Sydney said, pulling Coral into her arms. You were incredible. I had good inspiration, Coral replied, kissing Sydney softly, not caring who might see. They drove back to Carter Trading Stables as the sun set over the Kentucky hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that matched the contentment in Coral's heart. The divorce papers had been finalized the week before, and while it had been painful, it had also felt like closing a door on a life that had never quite fit. I have something to tell you, Coral said as they pulled into the stable's driveway. Sydney's expression grew concerned. What is it? NBC offered me a position in New York, head of equestrian sports broadcasting. It's a huge opportunity, everything. I thought I wanted professionally. Sydney's face fell slightly, though she tried to hide it. That's that's amazing, Coral. I'm proud of you. I turned it down, Coral said quietly. You what? I turned it down. I told them I had found everything I needed right here in Kentucky. Coral reached over and took Sydney's hand. I told them I'd found home. Sydney's eyes filled with tears. Are you sure? I don't want you to give up your dreams for me. I'm not giving up my dreams, Coral said firmly. I'm choosing new ones, better ones. Dreams that include building a life with the woman I love, in a place that makes my soul quiet. They sat in the car for a long moment, hands intertwined, watching the horses graze in the paddock as darkness fell around them. There's something else, Coral said, her voice soft with wonder. I've been working on a proposal for Churchill Downs, a program that pairs retired racehorses with people dealing with trauma or stress-related conditions. A place where synesthetes and others with sensory processing differences can find peace and healing. Sydney's face lit up with understanding and excitement. A partnership? A partnership, Coral confirmed. Between the racing world and the healing world, between your expertise and my connections. Between us. Sydney leaned across the console and kissed Coral deeply, a kiss that painted the inside of Coral's mind with every beautiful color she'd ever imagined. I love you, Coral Wilson, Sydney whispered against her lips. I love you too, Sydney Carter. And I love the life we're going to build together. As they walked hand in hand toward the barn, toward their future, the night sounds of the stable created a gentle symphony of color in Coral's perception, soft blues and greens and silvers that spoke not of chaos, but of peace. Not of endings, but of beginnings. The doctor had said it was stress, but Coral knew now that the real cure had never been in a prescription bottle or a therapy session. It had been here all along, in the gentle eyes of a woman who saw her completely and loved her anyway, in the healing power of honest touch, and the courage to rebuild a life on a foundation of truth instead of expectation. Some people spend their whole lives looking for home, she reflected as Sydney's hand squeezed hers gently. She had been lucky enough to find it in the most unexpected place of all, in the barn after dark, in the arms of a woman who had taught her that sometimes the greatest healing comes not from fixing what's broken, but from discovering that you were never broken at all, just different, just beautiful. Just worthy of a love as vast and colorful as the synesthetic symphony playing eternally in her mind. The old man's voice fades into the gentle sounds of evening, leaving only the wisdom. That love, true love, has its own perfect timing and its own mysterious ways of healing what we didn't even know was wounded.